sectors here. If you think I sound a little sick, that is because I am, so yeah. But, this little guy, you know? Love him, hate him. You can't deny he is one of the biggest artists in EDM, but he is starting to roll out singles for his album Joytime 4. And I decided that since I'm on break and bored, now might be a good time to go back through all of Marshmello's previous albums and review them and see if they still hold up. So we'll be starting with Joytime, his 2016 debut album. So yeah, let's just get into it. Know Me is the album's opener, and it's a bold statement with its message, saying that everybody knows Marshmello, which has held up surprisingly well since Mello has grown to be such a household name. It's a fairly simple and repetitive track, much like most of this album, as I'll discuss. Has a pretty repetitive vocal sample, but I find it to be catchy, and it works to the track's advantage. The melodics of this track are actually really enjoyable, but the drop takes an emptier approach. But I find that while it's anticlimactic, I think the empty approach for the drop was probably the right call. The melodic sections of the track are great, and I think that if Mello went for a more melodic drop, it could have easily gotten too messy or overcomplicated. So I think that, all around, this is a pretty good track. Summer is the next track on the album, and it's okay. It has a cute melody and the production's nice, but I just don't think I like the high-pitched lead in the drop. It's okay, but it's definitely nothing I'll come back to. Find Me is another track that highlights Mello's melodic production, which is quite nice. It has these vocal chops that are kinda weird, but I dig them. The drop takes a fairly empty approach, relying on its nice melody and eventually adding on more melodic elements, progressing and building into something nicer. Not sure if I'm a fan of the square bass used, but other than that, it's a solid track. Take It Back is another track that I don't care too much for, but still okay. It has some nice vocal chops and features that vocal pluck that Mello later used in his popular track Alone, his funny Monster Cat release. I find that this one has one of the weaker melodies on this album, and focusing on it in the drop really didn't help the track. I also think that the lead in the drop is a little bit grating on the ears, but it's not a huge issue. Bounce features some pleasant piano and a great melody. It's definitely a bit more hard-hitting than the other tracks so far, which is a nice change of pace. I'd say it's a pretty good track. Blocks is another solid track from this album. It has some nice vocals and vocal chops, which something most of these tracks share. It shares that same square bass that I'm not sold on from Find Me, but it has a solid melody, so I'm really not too upset. Pretty solid track. Show Me is another track that highlights Mello's melodic production, with some nice vocal chops as the main focus here. While I think the track is nice for the most part, the vocal chops do get a bit annoying in the drops. It does get a little annoying, which brings the track down. And I also just don't like how in the second half of the track, some of the vocal chops just awkwardly get pitched up. I get that it's there for variation, which is, a good thing to incorporate, but I just don't think it sounds right, in my opinion. Want You To is a cute track, the vocal chops are nice, and I enjoy the melody as well. Unfortunately, I'm not really a fan of the lead used in the drop, kinda like Summer. The lead sounds much better playing the shorter notes in the second drop though, so I do think it gets better as the track goes on. Home is probably the most forgettable track on this album. It does a good job of highlighting Mello's energetic melodic production, much like a lot of the other tracks here is kind of the same compliment I keep giving off the tracks. However, the melody here just failed to latch on to me, and it was really the only track I failed to remember when I was re-listening to this album. I remembered what all the other tracks sounded like, but this one I couldn't remember. Keep It Mellow is the final track off the album, and is the absolute standout of the album. It's the only track to have a full vocal feature, and Omar Lynx does a great job. Mello backs him up with some banging production, and it's all around a really good track. I find the fade-out intro to be a little lame, but it doesn't really bring the song down. It's just a hype track with some good vocals and good production. Overall, Mello made a pretty solid debut album with Joytime. Nothing here is groundbreaking, but it's still an enjoyable album that honestly is aged fairly well. None of the tracks here are bad at all, but there's just some that are forgettable. In the years since this album, Mello has risen to an insane level of fame, and has been frequently collaborating with other large artists. And because of this, his style has grown very far from what he created here, becoming a lot more radio friendly, and honestly, I can see why some fans miss this era of Mello. I think this album was a solid 6 out of 10. Pretty enjoyable album, but like nothing amazing. Would love to know your thoughts on this album, so feel free to leave them in the comments. If there are any other albums you'd like me to take a look at, then feel free to leave that in the comments as well. And maybe we'll see you later.